What if I told you that the difference between high trust and low trust organizations isn't 5 or 10%? It's a staggering 51-point gap in financial performance, with 97% of high trust employees saying their company performs well financially versus only 46% in low trust organizations. I'm Kim Bohr, President and COO of SparkEffect and host of the Courage to Advance podcast. And today I'm joined by Delgaty, an applied cultural anthropologist and the founder of Note and Niche, a research and strategy studio helping mission-driven organizations navigate complexity with clarity. We partnered with Erin to conduct research on the real financial costs of trust on organizations. And wow, did we learn a lot. There is so much to cover, so let's dive in. Welcome to Courage to Advance.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I am so excited you're here, and I'm excited with this research we've just are launching and the insights it's given us. So let's dive right in. So in partnership with SparkEffect, you have completed what we think is perhaps the most comprehensive study on organizational trust during disruption that we've seen. And you've discovered something that completely flips the conventional crisis management on its head. Let's talk about that and what you found that really surprised us, even yourself as a researcher.
Yeah. Trust is an interesting concept, right? Because it's not like it's a foreign concept to businesses. It's in almost every mission statement or set of values. I mean, we were joking about ahead of time. It's not like there's a company out there that's like, oh, our mission is to be deliberately untrustworthy. It's an idea that people generally pride themselves on. It's like, well, I am trustworthy, or you can trust me. It's one of those things where it gets talked about a lot, but people don't really necessarily know specifically what it means. And there's a lot of kind of back of the napkin math on sort of what trust is and how it, and like where does it apply and what is sort of the performance of trust look like? So it's a lot like how we use the word ironic. It's like we all kind of use it, but it's like, well, what does it actually mean? Like, well, there'll always be some English major in the room. They'll be like, well, actually, it's like that. But it's kind of aside from that, I think sort of what we were expecting going into this project was that, trust would be this kind of resource, sort of like it would be something that you would have in the bank. And every time that there was a disruption, you would withdraw a bit from the bank. And that it was like that disruptions were like whether that disruption was a personal crisis or that disruption was an organizational crisis like a layoff or a restructuring or a change in leadership, that moment was kind of going to be always on a subtraction. Like it was always going to be a subtraction. That was not an opportunity to get better. That was an opportunity to control damage. And what we actually find is that in certain cases, if you handle that disruption well, like if you handle it tactfully, if you handle it humanely, that it actually isn't a withdrawal. It actually creates more trust. That actually the trust that folks had going into the disruption increases because of how leadership handled that disruption. And that's incredibly surprising. But it does also kind of make sense.
It does. And so what I hear you saying is if, as an executive, sitting in this seat today, I shouldn't be trying to necessarily avoid this next crisis, in part because it's just going to be inevitable. But instead, what you're saying is there's really an opportunity that perhaps this becomes one of the biggest trust building moments of an organization's kind of existence, if you will.
Trust is like a living thing. Like it's not like an inert thing. It's not like just something that like, oh, you build it up and then you spend it and you lose it. And then you have to build it back up more. The people who are your kind of go-to people are the people who were tested like under fire in certain areas and like came through, like the people that kind of came through for you in the bad times, right? Crisis or disruption or what do you want to call it has a way of underscoring who people are and who people are to you. And it becomes a way of kind of measuring the quality of a relationship. Low quality relationships don't last through disruption. And that same kind of logic, that social logic that we apply in our personal lives, we see that with people applying that in the workplace. In the workplace, it's even more, I think it's arguably even more critical because those relationships are so tied to your livelihood that you actually have to take a very close accounting of those.
So when we think about some of the aspects that came through in your research, you examine trust, and its impact of what we coined these three R's: revenue, retention, and reputation. Let's discuss those numbers because they're really, really profound in how just how the where the trust is actually impacting real business metrics.
Yeah, we kind of talked about during the planning process a lot about the three R's, like revenue, retention, and reputation. And like we live in an era of like a lot of BS metrics, and it's like, whoa, look at these things and click through rate and price per whatever. But like, let's be honest, there's really only three things any business actually cares about. How much money are you making? Are your people who are good sticking around? And is your reputation worth anything to buyers, to potential employees, to sort of other, businesses that you might work with? And so what we wanted to see was, does trust, sort of its presence or absence, have an impact on these critical metrics? And what we see is that they do. Like they have a very pronounced impact. Like, surprise, surprise, that companies that are trustworthy tend to retain employees better. And what we also see is that how you handle a disruption, whether you handle that disruption in a way that improves trust or whether you handle that way and you handle it in a way that decreases trust, has a direct impact on whether or not people want to stick with you. Retention, for example, when you compare the folks who handled a disruption well to the leaders that handled a disruption poorly, organizations had a 46% drop in sort of perceived retention. So,
That's
like,
significant.
yeah,
That's
it's very
really truly
significant.
significant.
And you see a similar drop in terms of, do we have sort of a solid industry reputation? Also, a 64% drop. And then if you look at sort of a big one, which one of the things for when you look at revenue, you can look at actual money, but you can also look at, do we have kind of a clear plan forward? Do we have strategic clarity? Like, this disruption happened. Did we learn something from this disruption so that when we encounter the next inevitable disruption, are we going to be like flat on our backs the same way we were last time? Or are we going to respond better? This kind of key predictor of revenue, it's a 85% drop, regard whether you handle it well or if you handle it poorly. If you handle things in a way, if you bungle trust, people are just going to assume that you're going to keep bungling it. And so the whole like, is this company a safe bet? No, it's not. Like, if you handle it well, then wherever sort of people placed you as a safe bet is going to be elevated after the disruption.
And I think there's a couple things that stand out with what you said and what the research shows, right? One of the things that, listeners might be thinking, well, isn't trust of course it's a given that if if trust breaks, there's going to be impact, but we take that as something that is perhaps intuitive. And yet what we're showing here is there's really significant business impact to the bottom line potentially here in what these survey results are showing us. And that's something that most haven't been able to quantify before. And we can actually say this is something you really should be paying attention to on a much more on a strategic level. I think the other thing you said that I want to make sure listeners hear is that we know disruption is constant. And those that were surveyed really showed significant disruption, whether it was personal or professional, in a way that they were also thinking about how it was handled from the organization or their direct leaders perspective. So these metrics aren't soft in any way, shape, or form. And when we think about this, the trust performance index, we looked at really five very specific domains that were measured. I think it's really, it would be great to, let's talk a little bit more about those and share what those domains were for everybody.
Yeah, and I think that sort of you bringing up the domains is really important because it also underscores that to sort of about trust not being intuitive, that trust is also not sort of a flat measure either. It has a texture to it. If you think of an organization as a community of work, it can excel in certain areas of trust and be really deficient in other areas. And so we mapped out trust in kind of five different aspects. Some of them were sort of organizational, and some of them are what we were calling kind of more local or sort of related to the sort of things going on in your everyday experience of work, sort of your direct teams, your direct leadership. And then there's other, the sort of organizational is more at kind of the high level. We've got strategic clarity, for example. So, do employees understand the direction of the organization? Do they understand the purpose, the rationale? So, is there trust that like there's someone with a plan behind the wheel, or are they all just asleep at the wheel? Then there's psychological safety, and that's a popular concept, particularly right now. But do you feel safe at work? Do you feel like you have to walk on eggshells? Do you feel like you can take risks? Do you feel like you can speak up if you see something? Then there's relational continuity and kind of cultural belonging, and that was a group that we created. But like, do you feel like you belong here? Do you feel like a member of the team or a member of the family or a member of the group? Are you an insider or an outsider? That's particularly, sort of if any company that's ever experienced kind of a merger, any company that's ever experienced an acquisition, any company that's had a kind of core team of people who've been there for a long time, and now you've had like a hiring burst, and now there's a new cohort of people who've been there, 5 years or less. There's always this kind of texture to the community, and like, do you fit in or do you not fit in?
And are you welcomed, right? Do you feel that people, you've been welcomed into that?
Is it like one of those like you're going to have to pay your dues kind of thing, or is it like they held the door open for you? Technology and systems trust, that's a really interesting one. So like when you implement a system, or also as those systems operate, do you feel that they're operating fairly? So like when the system is like let to go operate, and the human sort of takes their finger off the machine, is it going to operate in an equitable way? And then there's the fairness and change impact perception. So when a disruption inevitably happens, is it handled in a way that is fair and equitable? That the organization and that sort of teams like address that and do it in a way that says, okay, like we understand this is not the best of times, but you did the best you could in the worst of times. And so what we see though is that there's certain ones that tend to be high. There's certain sort of dimensions that tend to be consistently high, and there's certain dimensions that tend to be consistently lower. But what we also see is that there are certain aspects that tend to shift wildly when there is disruption, particularly when that disruption is handled well or handled poorly.
What was surprising when we looked at the results of these domains, there was a pattern that started to emerge. Strategic clarity, the tech systems trust, and the fairness in and change impact. Those are obviously things that matter really significantly during a crisis. And we also saw that those where a lot of organizations were consistently scored lower. Let's talk a little bit about that because it doesn't seem like it's necessarily a coincidence.
No, it's not. I mean, so areas of trust that are primarily associated with the organization as an entity tend to be lower than trust scores that are associated with your immediate team or leadership. And I think it makes sense because if you think about sort of your experience of work or my experience of work or sort of anyone's experience of work, if you say, well, who do I work with? Like, what are the relationships that I interact with on a daily basis? Those are the people who are in your department, in your team, on sort of, special projects. They're the people you're going to meetings with. They're the people you're bumping into throughout the day. They're the people who, you're, sending emails to and then also talking to. You know, we're social creatures. Humans are social creatures. We see the world through relationships. And so things that we have an actual relationship, like other people who can have reciprocal relationships with us, we tend to value those, and connect with those to a higher degree than something abstract like the organization. Like, sure, you work for SparkEffect and like, you're high up at SparkEffect, but still SparkEffect as a organization is kind of an abstract concept. If you imagine yourself with SparkEffect, what you probably imagine is a cluster, a little constellation of folks that you're regularly talking to.
Definitely.
And so it's natural that trust manifests easier with other people. It also makes sense though that because like the sort of the other side of that coin is that trust in an organization is kind of twofold.
Hmm.
There's trust for an organization and then there's trust for the people that make up your experience of the organization.
Well, and that was something that really stood out, dramatically in the research was the difference between that direct leader in the organization and where the impact hits the most. Let's talk a little bit about some of those results that came through because the local or those we call those direct leaders that are in your immediate sphere are the ones that are by far taking the biggest hit.
Yeah. We do see that local leaders or direct leaders, sort of the people that you're interacting with on a day to day basis, are sort of the trust champions.
Mhm.
And that kind of makes me cringe saying trust champions, but like they are the kind of people, they're the folks that you go to. They're your go to people. Like our experience of trust is based on our relationship to our go to
Yeah.
people.
Well, they're the ones that in the day-to-day movement of your life, when something's off, when there's, you've got a sick kid that's sick at home, or, these things are they're the ones who know and hear about it generally. And it makes sense that we're building a closer bond with those people in that immediate sphere of our world or our influence.
Yeah, absolutely. In an organization, that those human relationships that form sort of the basis of your trust at work are also the most susceptible to being impacted. Um, the fact is that what the data shows is that people do not necessarily expect the organization as like a entity to be particularly trustworthy. They can trust the organization, but like they're also like an organization does not operate like a human.
Right.
So like this whole sort of idea of like, oh well, the organization like has to have these kind of like these organizational values are not values of the organization. They're values of the people who lead or sort of
Right.
work at the organization. What people are looking at, like where they're actually directing their attention, is not at the organization. They're directing it at the people who run the organization, the people who, in their experience, run the organization
Mhm.
or run their experience of the organization. So that's what's under the most scrutiny. And we see that because those are the folks that stand to gain the most or lose the most when a disruption is handled well or handled poorly.
As an executive, I should be really concerned with how well equipped these local or these direct leaders are because of the nature of those just interpersonal dynamics. And yet it seems like if they aren't well equipped, the trust is collapsing really from the ground up, as you would say. So,
Yes.
what are some of the implications we were seeing in the data around what was happening to these direct leaders or these direct leaders in these local, local spheres.
Well, the thing is, it's that if you're really going to ask the question of your own organization about, well, what is the level of trust in my organization, or what is the level of
Hmm.
trust, like how sort of trustworthy is my organization, is really a question of what is the level of trust between folks who work there and their direct manager, their direct leader. And that is all the way down. That is your frontline workers' relationship to their shift manager. That is your director of such and such's relationship to the VP of such and such. That's the relationship between the people who are on the C suite, like executive board. They're not abstract relationships, they are real relationships. And the nice thing about that is that because we're social creatures, we have the ability to look at those relationships. Like, it's not some like crazy, like weird metric, like that's
Yeah.
like, oh, we're collecting a certain, like it's not like we're collecting photons or something like that. Like, this isn't some, you know crazy science. Like, this is a thing we're already born with.
Right.
And you can look around and you can say, wow, like, do they have a good working relationship, or do they have a good trust? Is there trust there?
Hmm.
What we also see is that if an organization really hasn't prepared local leaders, hasn't prepared, and you have to take a broader sense of what leadership is. It is not just a title. It's not just because someone is a VP of such and such, they are seen as a leader by everybody under them. It's that really that local leaders, or sort of direct leaders, emerge through practice. They're the people, they're your kind of go-to people. And so rather than sort of saying we are looking for leaders at the title level, it's that we're looking at leaders who are the go-to people, in our organization. And what we see is that if you have not prepared those go-to leaders with the right skills, sort of the how do you address conflict, how do you sort of lead by example, how do you kind of manage controversy, how's your bedside manner when you're dealing with sort of interpersonal issues. If you're not preparing that, then you're really missing out. Then you're just kind of creating a problem. We looked at a bunch of different sort of interventions, we called them, that things, when a disruption happens, this is what a company could do. Like, these are sort of actions that folks could take. And we looked at sort of three different aspects of it. Do they offer it, or do they not offer it? And the good news is that most organizations offered, like, in when a disruption happened, most organizations did something.
Hmm.
Most organizations did not ignore it, which was an option. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought that we would see a higher rate of organizations just kind of going,
Yeah.
well,
Just, yeah, exactly.
that's kind of a you problem, not us problem. And what we also looked at is instances in which these interventions succeeded, in which they also like failed. Um, and what we see is that, there are some that have a really high success rate, like something, and the things that have the highest success rate are things that seem simple, like that it'd be easy to do. Like, there are things that like don't cost you anything, like
Yes.
creating an opportunity for people to voice their concerns about an issue.
Hmm.
The most effective way of dealing with, like, the thing that has the highest sort of net impact on trust is giving people an opportunity to voice their concerns.
Which is an easy solution
It
to
is.
do.
It's an easy solution. And the fact is, too, that it also has the lowest incident rate of going poorly. So, what that suggests is that you have a good chance of not screwing it up if you do it. Like,
Yeah.
all of these interventions have a chance of being screwed up if it's not handled well. You really can't go wrong by voicing, like, giving people an opportunity. You can go super wrong if you're really cagey about everything. Like, if you're like, whoa, we're going to try to soften things, or we're going to use
Hmm.
euphemisms, or we're not going to be transparent about kind of our continued uncertainty, that has a huge negative impact.
And what we found was that was where those direct managers and leaders took the biggest hit.
Yeah, because they're the ones who are facilitating these opportunities. Like the organization as a whole submitting like the public letter, like the statement on the thing,
Yes.
has nowhere near the impact of a conversation with a local leader.
So having these local and direct leaders really equipped is what's one of the most critical aspects of opportunity that came from a lot of this, what we found in this research. I think the other thing I want to talk about that is really, really significant was you've referred to previously as kind of sticking the landing, right? So, this idea that part of what went into this research was you measured 11 specific leader actions that they could take during disruption. You started to talk a little bit about some what the organization can take, and some of these built trust while others destroyed it. So what really separated those trust builders from some of what was more the maybe the trust destroyers?
The things that had the biggest impact were things that, for kind of lack of a better term, are human driven. They're like,
Hmm.
they're things that humans do,
Yeah.
that there are sort of moments in time or sort of moments in the disruption where there is an opportunity for human interaction. And if that interaction goes well, things go well. Like trust is built in that moment. What we kind of see in this sticking the landing, no one reasonable is going into the world of work and thinking, we are never going to have problems. This is going to be great.
Yeah.
We're never going to encounter any sort of issues or hiccups or anything like that. We're great. I mean, maybe if you work in like a, crazy steady job, you're like, it's not like
Yeah.
we're somewhere between sort of post office and pirate, right? We're like, we understand that there's going to be disruption. At the same time, it's not about whether one trips or sort of has that jump. It's about how do you sort of stick the landing. It's like, and we have a great deal of scrutiny over how do people respond, how do leaders, people who are supposed to be responsible by sort of position and by design, they are supposed to be responsible. How do they handle that sort of moment when you have to take account of the disruption? Like the disruption has happened, the disruption is inevitable, disruptions are going to happen. It's not about the disruption, it's about how you handle the disruption.
And in doing this, we came forward with this concept of trust elasticity and the
Yeah.
varying ranges. And what were some of the pieces that were perhaps the least effective that come to mind from that study?
You think about sort of the things that were most effective were listening sessions, opportunities to talk about stuff. Interactions with direct managers was one of the things that we tested. Interactions with your team, how well did your team handle it? But then it's sort of organizational leadership. How do they communicate? So that's when you start getting kind of more abstract. Like, what's their sort of communication? It can make a positive impact
If they're aligned and
if they're
they're,
aligned,
yes.
but it can also do a lot. Like a tone deaf response can really negatively impact. So I think one of the things that we kind of need to like maybe pause here and say as well is that direct leaders have a disproportionate impact, but it's not that organizational leadership has no impact. It's not that like organizational leaders just get a free pass and they can just do whatever they want. And they can just kind of go about like, certain CEOs right now and just say whatever they want and go, you know,
Yeah.
like people are paying attention. The expectation is lower, that there is more of a general expectation that leadership at the organizational level is going to be out of touch with the common worker, but they can still like mess it all up. And we see that sort of poor communication by organizational leadership has a significant negative impact on trust. And that it makes things harder for local leaders. Like if the organization is screwing it up at the top, it's just there's going to be a trickle down effect. in that it's going to be an issue for the leader down at the local level.
So when we think about, as we were looking through all this data and what really surfaced and looking at the data on interventions in particular, we know that, as you mentioned, right, open communication, fair treatment, opportunities to voice concerns are certainly at the top. What we also noticed, though, were some of these things that I think are relevant to everybody's world right now around technology rollouts, things that relate to how leaders are facing these AI transformations, of which, in some cases, companies are laying off workers in order to create, financial capacity to invest in AI. And so when we think about that, AI implementation, this digital transformation we're all going through, what should leaders be learning from this experience based on the research that you did for us?
Yeah. Trust in technology is one of the lowest, like consistently lowest rated in terms of like overall trustworthiness. Cultural belonging, for example, tends to be, and psychological safety tend to be high, sort of things that are directly related to people's relationships with managers or direct leaders. People's sort of security around technology is consistently lower. It's consistently one of the lowest aspects. And interventions around technology and sort of also kind of what we looked at is kind of frequency. The implementation of AI was the most common disruption that we found, and it had a significant impact. And what we see is that at this moment in time, implementing new technology in the workplace is not a good thing. Like, it's not something that employees are like, oh, we're going to implement this new technology. And everyone's like, oh, great. That's amazing. Like, let's do it. It's that when you implement new technology, honestly, like usually implementing new technology is done not, it's not gonna, we're gonna make your lives like so much easier. It's usually like efficiency. It's like we're gonna
Mhm.
create so much efficiency. And at this point, efficiency is just shorthand for we're gonna do layoffs eventually. Like we're gonna need less of you. Like this is going to be bad for your working experience. This is probably going to be bad for your job security. Now, that may not be what it actually means. And like a company in sort of good faith could roll out some technology and be like, this is really actually going to make things efficient. But sort of what we say and what how that is interpreted really is important. And right now, there's a lot of distrust, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of scrutiny around any technology that's being rolled out, whether it's AI or otherwise. Because, and I mean, it makes sense. The news is full of people who are talking about how great it's going to be.
Mhm.
You know, you've got CEOs laying 4,000 people off and telling and saying, "Oh, this has been the most exciting 8 months of my career." It's like, whoa,
Yeah.
this is a really bad moment in time for 4,000 people, and you're just like,
Yeah. And one of the things that I found fascinating that tied to this was that it wasn't necessarily what broke trust the greatest. And one of the pieces that surfaced was that when your leadership, your direct leader is impacted, is removed, is changed, that's caused one of the biggest drops in trust.
yeah,
That something like this where we're saying, "Hey, we're freeing up capacity in order to invest in AI," and there goes your leader, actually is what does the damage is when that leader disappears.
yeah, because you can think about like a death in the family. Like you're like that person's just gone. Like they're gone now.
Yes.
And now you don't have that person to rely on. If you think about sort of your, community as like a web of people that you can rely on, and every strand kind of lays on the other strand.
Mhm.
When one of those strands snaps, it weakens the entire structure. And we feel that. We see that when you remove a leader, like when leaders turn over, that's the one of the biggest disruptions in terms of impacting trust and in terms of severity. One of the things we looked at is like, well, how common is this? How much does it impact you personally and how much does it impact you professionally? And manager turnover was huge. I didn't expect that. I thought kind of people were going to be like, yeah, managers come and go. But that's actually one of the things that we see is that actually it's not that managers come and go. It's not that just, oh, like insert new goon here and we'll be fine. It's actually that that is a break in the relationship and it has a significant cost. If your sort of goal as an organization is to sort of flatten out your leadership, say, oh, we'll bring in technology and the robots can run the show. Those leaders do play a really important part in stabilizing work experience.
Absolutely.
People's experience of work is directly tied to their go-to people.
Absolutely.
The loss of that one person is not the loss of just that one person. It has a cascading effect on and particularly on sort of trust, people's relationship to the organization as a whole.
One of the things I thought was so fascinating too is, we've over the years we've always heard these stories about like people leave their managers, they don't leave their organizations. And what we saw in this research was managers are managers generically, right? Your direct manager, your direct leader actually is really critical in having because of this trust dynamic that exists in these tighter, more localized ecosystems. And so the idea that organizations need to be investing in these managers and having them informed and having them equipped when these difficult moments happen is actually really, it kind of flips it on the head of thinking about the importance of those relationships and how much that's going to mean in this world of trust in organizations. One of the other things I think that was so interesting too that we discovered was that there actually can also be a strong positive impact. And we found something that became a sort of a dividend, if you will. I think we should take a moment to share that as with our listeners as well.
Yeah, this relationship with the manager is so important, or this relationship with the leader, because we can't kind of get hung up on title. That leader is
Mhm.
sort of something, is like a thing you earn. Title is a thing someone gave you. Leader is a way people see you.
Yeah.
When that leader is equipped to handle things with care, handle things with humanely, whether that is a personal crisis, which is the most common, like death in the family, someone's sick, personal injury, or whether it's a organizational reshuffle around AI, it's that how that manager navigates that and helps that employee, you can be stronger on the other side of it. That actually, like, we can come through this together, and that kind of old trope of like, oh, we'll like go through this like tough time together and we'll come out stronger on the other end, is that actually the data shows that that's true, that that actually is a thing that happens. It's that you can go through bad times together and come out the other side stronger if it's handled well. If it all goes to shit and your leader is lost the plot, then yeah, of course you're going to burn people and it's going to be bad, and it's not going to it's going to be disastrous on the other side.
And it's huge. I mean, the disastrous side has real impact, as we saw in revenue, reputation, and retention.
Huge swings. And even if you don't have to do it perfect, but if you just do it pretty well.
And in good faith.
Yeah, and in good faith, and you do it consistently, and you do it with transparency and openness, and you try your best, and you actually have the tools and techniques to be able to handle those things. You're going to see an increase. You're going to see, and this isn't like, oh, we only saw this dividend or we only saw this increase for the minority that got it really, really well. Like, right. No, we
Mhm.
see it with the group that got it, did a pretty good job.
Yeah, and it created it and it went what you found was that that trust went above the baseline. They
Right.
gained, and so
Even in cases where they just did a pretty good job. Like with the B average was like good enough to go above the baseline trust.
and that is significant, and organizations really do leaders inside the organizations need to be recognizing that that's real, and that's tangible, and that's worth putting the effort into trying to build a better foundation of trust, the organization that's really consistent. As we start to wrap up, one of the things that we do, from the spark effect lens, is that we're working with leaders that are, when we see perhaps the strongest or high performing leaders, they don't wait for crisis to start this communication with transparency, but they really do demonstrate much of what we've found through this research around consistency and being transparent to the degree that can, and really trying to uh, invite people in and all of that. And so we know that there's this opportunity to build muscle in a sense, finding all these different moments. It doesn't have to all be top down. It should be really throughout the organization. And the research really validates all of that. So one of the things that, as I'm getting ready to do is set off and start to talk about this research with people and go on some speaking engagements and really start to share why we think this is so important. And I think that what I want to know is, what are the one or two things that you want every executive to understand about this trust and research that we think is so important that they know?
First and foremost, it's that when you think about trust, trust is a conversation. You should think about trust as a conversation. And it is a two-way conversation. It is not a monologue. It is a dialogue between two people. And it's not between superior and inferior, it's between two people. And how do you kind of get better at talking? How do you get better at having, a conversation? How do you get better at like public speaking? Is through practice. You do it a bunch, like do it often. Don't be afraid to get a B. Like that's fine. Like it's okay. And then the second thing is, and this kind of is kind of rolls into the conversation element, is that work is not special. And I've made this argument over and over again, but work is not special. Like work is not a special set of rules. The rules that we learn, how do we build trust in our everyday lives? How do we build trust in our personal lives? How do we come to have trusting relationships with our like friends or family? Assuming we have trusting relationships with them, we know how to do it. We know how to, like, don't screw people over, be transparent about things, deal in good faith, be there for people through good times and bad times. Those same rules apply to the world of work. The world of work is not special. It is not a place of exception where the rules that we learned in kindergarten all the way up don't apply. They absolutely apply. And they actually apply. They're even more important to apply because these are relationships that are double tasked. They're directly tied to your livelihood. So, two things is that it's a conversation. Trust is a conversation, and it's a conversation you should be having every single day with as many people as you can have it with, and that the rules are the rules you already know. There's no, like, there is special training that will help you. This is high stakes. A lot of this stuff is high
Mhm.
stakes, and managing folks and sort of managing relationships is an art and a science. But there are some baseline rules that are the rules you already learned.
Yeah.
Like you already learned them and you don't have to, it's like, wow, like how do I not be a bad person?
Yeah.
By doing the things you do to your friends. Like, would you do this to a friend? I understand this person might not be your friend, but if you have a trusting relationship with your friend, like, how did you build that?
It's so interesting to hear you say that too, because I think sometimes we have leaders and managers and people that just think, well, work and personal are still so separate. And so sometimes the idea of asking somebody, how they're doing is still a very foreign way of connecting when it's a really foundational way of building trust. And so I think as we you wrap up this conversation, I really want to challenge our listeners to think about this a little bit differently, to download our trust paper, but to also think about, for your next crisis, it's coming whether you want it to or not. And the question isn't whether you can avoid it, it's really whether you'll use it to build the competitive advantage that only these well led organizations that we researched capture. And that the trust dividend is optional, but the organizations that earn it will be the ones that really thrive in whatever disruption comes next. Aaron, I want to also just thank you deeply for partnering with us at SparkEffect to do this research. It was incredibly insightful for us, and we know it will continue to be for those that we work with and our clients and our others that get to listen to this. And so I want to just really thank you again for joining me here in this conversation today.
Well, absolutely. And I want to, thank you too for partnering. And I'll, say that like it's a moment in which there's a lot of focus on kind of AI and technology and sort of non-human innovation. But it is moments like this where, kind of when we have such a strong emphasis on kind of the non-human, that we should also turn our emphasis towards the human as well. And we should say, well, these, because without these human relationships, without these sort of the relationship between, employee and leader, or between sort of employee and organization, we don't have any of this. That there is no work to be done, and so because we don't live in the Jetsons. This is a world of work that's still fundamentally human. And so this is a great moment to ask questions about, what does it mean to be more human at work, particularly at a moment when work might seem like it's becoming less human, is actually the time to become even more human.
That's a wonderful place for us to wrap. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Oh, thank you.
This research proves that trust isn't just a nice to have, it's a measurable competitive advantage. For listeners who want to turn these insights into action, please visit our Courage to Advance podcast.com page for free resources from today's conversations, or connect with us directly to explore how we help organizations operationalize trust where it matters most, in leaders, in teams, in transitions, and in governance. Thank you for tuning in to Courage to Advance, where transformative leadership isn't about having all the answers, it's about having the courage to find them.